Welcome back to the Contrarian, everybody. Today I'll be taking a look into an article that just came out about a week ago. It's very significant in that it's official that central banks in 2022 purchased more gold collectively than at any other year in the last 55 years. So this is very significant because if you go 55 years ago, the dollar was still partially backed by gold. There had not been the decoupling from the gold standard yet. And so it's very significant that central banks are turning back towards gold as they begin to lose trust in the current globalized nature of the monetary system that it's turned into. I'll walk through this article real quick and then I'll talk about the implications of this, why this is a big deal, even though it's happening very gradually. And I'll just take a deep dive into this article first. So this is from Financial Times. It came out on December 29th of last year. Central banks buy gold at fastest pace in 55 years, and analysts are pinning China and Russia as the big buyers. So central banks are scooping up gold at the fastest pace since 1967, with analysts pinning China and Russia as big buyers in an indication that some nations are keen to diversify their reserves away from the dollar. Now, this isn't necessarily anything new. Of course, earlier in 2022, after the US and NATO sanctioned Russia, we saw the Russia plus the BRICS nations and a lot of other nations actually get together and begin to form what they say will be an alternate to the dollar in terms of trading with each other. But it's also very notable that they then acted on that. They were then very heavy buyers of gold. And so it does appear that that would indicate that they are going to plan some sort of gold backing in their currency. But I'll keep reading. Data compiled by the World Gold Council, an industry-funded group, has shown demand for the precious metal has outstripped any amount in the past 55 years. Last month's estimates are also far larger than central banks' official reported figures, sparking speculation in the industry over the identity of the buyers and their motivations. Now, I had a really nice interview with Andy Schectman about a month ago. In that interview, he mentions that a lot of these large buyers are likely very well-informed, wealthy families, not just central banks actually. They're likely pooled together. These wealthy families are forming some of this buying pressure that's out there. But there's also central banks that are not transparent in their actual gold purchases. Notably, China for decades now has not been transparent in their gold estimates and in what they're actually purchasing. And it just calculating back of the napkin type calculations, one would come to the conclusion that China actually has tons more gold than they're actually reporting. But this is all because central banks are beginning to lose trust with each other. The flight of central banks to gold would suggest the geopolitical backdrop is one of mistrust, doubt, and uncertainty after the United States and its allies froze Russia's dollar reserves, said Adrian Ash, head of research at Bullion Vault. The last time this level of buying was seen marked a historic turning point for the global monetary system. In 1967, which is the year you have to go back to get to the closest amount of gold purchased by central banks, European central banks bought massive volumes of gold from the US, leading to a run on the price and the collapse of the London gold pool reserves. That hastened the eventual demise of the Bretton Woods system that tied the value of the US dollar to the precious metal. So it's important to note that prior to 1971, when the dollar was officially decoupled from the gold standard, there were events leading up to that that maybe look similar to the conditions we're seeing right now, with central banks beginning to anticipate something changing in the monetary system, acting on the direction they saw things going, and then what ended up happening was the eventual decoupling from the gold standard by the US. And so it's just interesting to see it now, prior to when anything has officially changed. Central banks, particularly in the East, are buying gold hand over fist. So it definitely would suggest that the Eastern central banks are teaming up with each other. They're not trusting Western central banks as much as they used to, and so they want to have gold, which is the safest haven asset. It's the only asset that is not someone else's liability, which is a very important thing when it comes to trust. So last month, the World Gold Council estimated the world's official financial institutions had bought 673 tons. And in the third quarter alone, 2022, central banks bought almost 400 tons of gold, the largest 3-month binge since quarterly records began in the year 2000. So it's by far the largest record since quarterly measurements started taking place, and in terms of the year, it's breaking records since 1967. Now we get to China acknowledging its intake, but also possibly trying to signal its limited role. The People's Bank of China earlier this month reported that in November it made its first increase in gold holdings since 2019 with a 32-ton bump worth about 1.8 US dollars. Yet the gold industry said Chinese buying is almost certainly higher. So again, you have China releasing a very conservative number, and everyone who can do basic math in terms of what mines in China are producing, what they've been purchasing from other central banks, it's almost certainly higher than that. So Mark Bristow, chief executive of Barrick, the world's second largest gold miner, said China had bought tons of gold in the high 200s mark. So it just goes to show that China, they have something up their sleeve with regards to gold. They are not releasing their actual gold holdings, and it's probably something that they're holding for when the time comes, when they feel it's the right time to officially upend the dollar being the unipolar world reserve currency in the world. If they want to try to usurp the dollar with their own gold-backed yuan or whatever it be, a basket of currencies with Russia or Brazil, etc. When that finally comes about, it's my guess that they're going to, and anybody's guess by the way, that they're going to back it at least partially with gold. And so that would really explain why Russia and China and India and all of these other Eastern nations are buying so heavily into gold as a safe haven asset. Now, what does this really mean? It means a lot, because for the past, ever since World War II, the dollar's essentially been the global reserve currency. It's definitely been backed by oil, which has aided it immensely in that. But decoupling the dollar from different international trade that has gone on for a while is going to be very significant, in the fact that all of a sudden you're going to have no need for these central banks to purchase U.S. treasuries. So it's been the case for the last 40, 50 plus years that central banks, they need dollars to trade with each other, so they buy treasury bonds, that gives them dollars, and now they can trade dollars with each other. And so suddenly they don't need dollars. What happens then? Well, you take a lot of the buying out of the U.S. Treasury market. Suddenly the U.S., which is so dependent on financing all of its spending with debt, begins to fall apart. So it is very significant in that way that deficit spending will not be able to go on to the extent that it has, and it does really upend everything. So I really wanted to make you all aware of this out there. I'm sure it's nothing new. If you've seen that interview I did with Andy Schectman, I highly recommend that. I'll put the link to that interview I did down in the description, because he really explains it better than I can. But this is a very interesting article to look at, because it is official that 2022 is a very high water mark in terms of gold buying. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all again at some point.